Today's scripture reading comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 4, and if you'd like to follow along in your bulletins, you're welcome to, as the text is printed there. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tested by the devil. He fasted 40 days and 40 nights, and afterward he was famished. The tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." Then the devil took him to the holy city and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, He will command His angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." Jesus said to him, "Again, it is written, do not put the Lord your God to the test." Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." And then Jesus said to him, "Away with you, Satan, for it is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." And then the devil left him, and suddenly angels came and waited upon him. May God bless our modern hearing of these sacred words.
It was breaking news this week in St. Louis, literally breaking news. A bear broke out of a cage at the zoo. And they captured the bear and they put him back in the cage and they got a bigger clasp. And the bear broke out again out of the cage at the zoo. Now, this has nothing to do with anything, except I was struck by that story, and I had intended to tell you a story about a bear of my own, and it was just too much fun to hear about the bear in St. Louis this very week, so I had to share it with you. So now let me tell you my bear story. Maybe you have a bear story too. My family was a big camping family. We went camping all the time, and we went camping to Yellowstone National Park. Have you been to Yellowstone? It's a beautiful place. We loaded the car with everything. My dad packed it all in the trunk of the car, cussing the whole time. We drove really long hours with all of us in the back of the car without a single seatbelt, I'll have you know. The kids rolling over each other and all. I was maybe 6, 7 years old. My sister, 6 years older, was a young teenager. So we went out to Yellowstone Park. When we get to Yellowstone Park, we go to the first campsite that we can get to, the first campground, and it looked rather full. We're driving around the campground. There was a ranger station there. My father looked right past it. My mother said, "Maybe we should stop and ask them for directions." My father humphed and kept driving. We looked around. We drove all the way around. Every single place was full, but maybe we'd missed one. We come by the ranger station. My mother suggested again that perhaps we should stop. My father again didn't do it. We made one more pass through all of the campsites. Finally, we go back to the ranger station. My dad goes in. He says, "We're looking for a camp spot." And they said, "Oh, this is all full." Duh. "But we have an overflow campground down the road, and maybe you want to go there." And so he said, "But it's a little primitive." That means no flush toilets. We kind of were used to that news. But it was worse than no flush toilets. There was also no actual campsites. It was just a big field. But we pulled into the campground and we set up our tent and made our tent and got all settled down. So there we are, settled down. We get everything unpacked. We go to see Old Faithful. Have you done that? Oh, it's really amazing. Right out of the ground, this thing shoots up and smells terrible, but it's wonderful. It's very exciting. We did that. We saw some other sights, and then we went back to our campground. And when we'd gotten to the campground, there was hardly anyone there when we first got there, but by the time we got back at night, the overflow campground was now overflowing. And because there weren't defined camp spots, we had our tent right here, but somebody put a little igloo tent right next to ours, just exactly next to ours, with hardly any space to get in between it. When you go to Yellowstone, there are signs everywhere. They say, do not feed the bears. But more than that, they say, don't put your food in your tent or anything. Put your food in your car and lock it all up safe and sound, which we did. I had a dutiful family. But the people who put in the tent next to us, they seem to have gotten it backwards. They put their food in the tent and they slept in the car. So in the middle of the night, in that space between the igloo tent, that little one like this, and ours, a rarely seen grizzly bear in the main part of the campus, but not so rare in the overflow part of the campus, came into that spot in between and in very quick work smashed their tent and swung back and hit our tent and smashed the ice chest and grabbed the goodies and smashed our tent and went running off. While the bear is swinging back and forth, silhouetted against the side of our tent, my sister sits up and starts to scream, but nothing came out. My dad grabs a hand axe, and the bear's gone. Well, my mother led a family discussion then. She always led the family discussions. First, she says to my sister, Martha, why didn't you scream? Weren't you terrified? She said, oh, Mama, I was scared to death, but nothing came out. And then she turned to my dad and said, Bob, what were you going to do with that hand axe? Protect your family? And he said, hell no, I was going to make another exit out of this tent. We love to tell that story, told it 1,000 times in our family. I told it one time to a high school youth group. And at the end of the story, one of the high schoolers, like these little kids here, asked a hard question. He said, is that a true story? And I started to just answer him just like that. Well, of course. Well, I don't remember what I remember actually happening and what I remember hearing from the story that we told. You know how that is? You have your memory, but then you have the memory of the story, and after you've told the story long enough, you don't remember what you remember and what's the story. And besides, I was only 7 or 8 years old. So I then described to him, I said, well, I don't have much historical evidence for this story, but I bet we could go back to Yellowstone, and because we reported that bear. Everybody reported that bear, and I bet you they have a 3x5 card somewhere that says Greenhaw's reported that, if they kept such a card. There's really no actual evidence that it happened. Is it a true story? I don't know, but I know the story's true. And what I know is true about it is my family loved to go on vacations together. My mother would always suggest we stop and get directions. My father, full of pride, would not allow it. That you could be so terrified that you could scream and nothing would come out. And even though you'd love to tell everybody how brave and bold you are, when it comes down to it, you're likely to be so frightened your first reaction is to cut a hole out of the tent and run. I don't know if it's a true story, but I know the story is true. It's especially true about the love that I enjoyed in my family, and we love to tell that story. We're at the beginning of Lent, and during Lent, we're going to hear a bunch of stories. We're going to hear stories about Jesus' ministry and travel, about his eating with his disciples, about his crucifixion and his resurrection. And during this whole season, starting with today, some of these stories stretch our ability to believe. Is it a true story? Did Jesus really go up on a mountain? Did he really not eat anything for 40 days and 40 nights? I believe that he was famished, it says in the text, but the rest, is it a true story? And then he meets the devil. Did the devil have a tail and horns and a pitchfork? What kind of devil was this? The tempter, the devil, Satan, called 3 different things in this story. Is it true? I'm filled with skepticism. There are no GPS images that were taken. There's no written document other than this story that everybody has told generation after generation. Just like my family story, there's not hard proof. Is it a true story? Or is the story true? Does the story describe the temptations that we have in life? The ways in which we want to exchange something good for something poor? The way we seek power or are tempted by power? And in all of those ways, this story communicates that Jesus, who is the Christ, who is the Son of God, who is to be the resurrected one, who is to be the founder and leader and mover of a whole movement called the church, rejects such power. Instead, chooses the power of love, of humility, of kindness, of sacrifice. Is this a true story? You'll ask that question over and over as you hear the stories during this Lent and throughout the time with the Bible. Don't quit asking that story, but don't become so tied up with it that you forget to hear the truth that is in the story. May we have ears to hear, and eyes to see, and a soul to feel the stories of God.